If you got into filmmaking because you like movies, you probably always have the question in your head, how can I make this look more cinematic? How can I create something that looks like a movie? And to investigate more into that direction, I recorded and edited a small cinematic scene in different ways using a cinema lens, a mist filter, and the Dehancer plugin. You've probably heard about some of these things already, so let's see what they do and let's find out if they are the right tool for you. For this video, JJC provided me with their 1/4 black mist filter, and Dehancer gave me free access to their film emulation tools. At the end of this video, I will give you a promo code that gives you 10% off of those plugins. Alright, with that out of the way, I have a question for you. What does cinematic mean to you? Let me know in the comments. I still haven't found a final answer for this, but I'm pretty sure it's not exclusively a technical thing. It's more about the effect it has on you. In the best case, the film sends you into a different world, it sucks you in. But how can we achieve that? I think many things have to come together, and there are many different ways to create an image that is somehow appealing in that way. Thing number one most people associate with a cinematic look is a shallow depth of field and using the focus to guide the viewer's attention. Even smartphones like the iPhone 13 Pro and above have a cinematic mode that allows you to achieve that effect. While this is completely simulated using depth information and artificial blur, a real film camera needs a lens with a large aperture and a follow focus system. But then many movie scenes actually have a large depth of field and still look cinematic. And this is because a lot more important than a shallow depth of field is good lighting. And that's kind of good and bad news. Good news because you don't necessarily need expensive equipment, and bad news because you can't really get away with just that. You need to know what you're doing, and it's nothing you can fix in post. But there's one simple trick, probably my biggest learning since I got into photography, and I will tell it to you when we talk about my demo shot in a minute. However, also the overall look of the footage is important, meaning colors and contrast. And this is something you can do in post using color grading, LUTs, or effect plugins. Movies nowadays are heavily color graded, and it's a science of its own, but even on social media, LUTs are a popular and easy way to bump up the visual appeal of reels. Another option is to use a reel filter in front of the lens. Some content creators say that you should always use a mist filter in order to get a smoother, less perfect or less digital look. So it's very tempting to do that because with such a filter you can create a more vintage look while using your modern autofocus lens. Cinema lenses that typically also have a softer look are a lot harder to use because you have to pull focus manually. Okay, that was a lot of theory. Now I want to show you my demo scene that I recorded so that we can see how we can create different looks. My basic idea for the scene was guy in low light watching something on TV and calling somebody. I recorded this with just 2 lights, and here comes the lighting tip that I was talking about earlier. When I was a child and got my first camera, I was told to always have the sun in the back, because otherwise everything would be totally black. That's due to the fact that those cameras had a separate exposure sensor on the outside that would receive a lot of light when shooting towards the sun, and then select a very short shutter speed. But having the light source in the back is also a very good recipe for boring images. It looks a lot more cinematic to have the light source behind the subject. And this is exactly what I did here. This creates a nice rim light, and the overall dark scene creates the right mood that I wanted. The second light source is the TV from the front, lighting up the dark side of the face from time to time. This is not a real TV, but the small rig LED light, which has some nice scene modes. I also put the honeycomb grid on it to direct the light more onto the face and not so much on the surroundings. I recorded this in C-Log 3, so the original footage looks like this. Then I used the color space transform node in DaVinci Resolve to convert it to Rec 709. And then I did some minor adjustments to the white balance and exposure, and I also applied some noise reduction. When I look at the footage, I think everything is exposed correctly, only the lamp is clipping. I can't really prevent that, but I actually don't mind. However, there's something else I don't like about the image. It doesn't look like a movie at all. It actually looks like I recorded myself in just bad light. So for some inspiration, let's go to shotdeck.com. I've discovered this only recently. It's a resource for single frames from movies that allows you to find ideas for your own projects. And when I look at some similar shots here, then I realize that they look a lot cleaner than mine. I could have shaved, I could have put makeup on, but what I will do instead is reduce the contrast and also the gain to make the image darker again. I think this does a lot already. Here's the before and after. However, the right side here is a bit too bright for my taste now. So what I'll do is to add a power window like this and pull down the gain so that we get a bit of this triangle on the face here back. And while we're at it, let's add some more vignette to darken the left edge a bit as well. So what do you think? I think it's not too bad. As a last thing, we can do some sharpening. We should not overdo this though, because we might end up with this over-sharpened smartphone look. But on the other hand, some more details on the bright parts of the face and the eyes might be nice. So let's do something like this. Now there's still a soft look to the image, but also some crispiness in the face. Okay, this is kind of what I had in mind for this scene. Just in order to make this section complete, I want to apply a LUT to turn this into something completely different. So let's pick Matrix here. Still one of my favorite movies. That's obviously a lot more stylized now than what we had before. So yeah, I'll deactivate this for now. Because now I want to show you how this would look with a cinema lens. What you saw so far with the Canon 24-105 f4L zoom lens at an aperture of f4, but I recorded the same thing with the Meike 50mm T 2.1 cinema lens. Unfortunately, I was not able to get the exact exposure because an aperture of f4 on the Canon doesn't translate directly to t4 on the Meike, so I had to eyeball it a bit. And the footage of the Meike turned out a bit darker. But looking at the log footage here, we can also see that the contrast of the Meike is a bit lower. I noticed that on the cheek here, for example, and the Canon lens seems to be a bit sharper, which also might be due to the fact that I had autofocus on the eyes while I had to manually focus the Meike lens. So I'm not sure if I could recognize which lens was used if I could see only one of the shots, but looking at them side by side, I see that the Meike lens tends to produce a lower contrast image right from the start. And remember, reducing the contrast was actually an important step to make our shot look more cinematic in the beginning. Another advantage of such a cinema lens is the large aperture that I didn't use in this shot to make it comparable to the Canon lens, where f4 is the limit. And it has gears to attach a focus motor to create those focus transitions that I talked about earlier. Having that said, you can also add rubber gear rings to your lens and then do the same thing. It's important though that your lens doesn't have too much focus breathing, which is that zooming that happens when you change the focus. This is another strength of cinema lenses compared to photo lenses, which are often not optimized for that because it just doesn't matter for stills. By the way, if you like this video, don't forget to tap the thumbs up button, and if you don't want to miss further videos like this, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Okay, now let's look at another variation of this shot, this time with a mist filter. What is that? Well, these are very popular because they make your footage look a bit more vintage or less digital. This is the JJC Black Mist Filter 1/4. You can screw this in front of your lens, and if you look closely, you can see that it has little particles spread around on the surface. Some people say this is actually just a dirty piece of glass. However, these particles are supposed to make the image softer and create a glow around light sources. So let's look at our scene with that filter. And the most noticeable difference is here by the light. And this is exactly that glow that I was talking about. It looks a bit like haze, but haze or fog is actually a lot different. let's look at some examples on shot deck for haze. You can see here that the haze can show the direction of the light because the effect is caused by the light hitting little particles floating around in the air. And this is also why haze creates a lot of depth in the image. The mist effect, on the other hand, happens just on the lens, not in the space. I think the origin of this glow effect are old lenses with poor coating on the glass that caused light to leak into dark areas, and those little particles on the filter imitate this and allow you to add these imperfections to your modern lens. Besides that glow effect, the image with the mist filter has a bit less contrast. Look at the face here. The dark areas are brighter and the face looks softer too. So it is a bit of a beauty filter. Black mist filters are called like that because they are supposed to keep the blacks more or less as they are. There are other types like gold mist that tint the highlights a bit gold. There are also different strengths like 1/4 or 1/8. And it's important to note that filters of different brands look different and the strengths are not normed. For comparison to the JJC filter, I also tried the KNF concept, and this seems to create an even stronger glow effect. And the blacks are even less affected by the filter. So, does the mist filter look more cinematic to you than the original version without our corrections in post? I think it does. This scene looks a lot better right out of the box, and especially in this scene with the background light, it really shines, pun intended. There are also ways to create a similar glow effect in post. Let's quickly try this by applying a Gaussian blur effect to this node and then use a qualifier to limit the effect to bright areas using the luminance range. And what you see here is that it similarly softens the bright spots in the image, but it does not have such a global effect. Those other areas here stay unchanged. In particular, it doesn't change the overall contrast. We also saw that the mist filter softened the skin a bit. We can achieve a similar effect using the mid detail slider. During my research for creating a cinematic look, I came across Dehancer. This is a plugin that emulates film. So you can apply this to your footage that you recorded with a digital camera, and it turns it into something that looks like it was recorded on an analog film. I was a bit skeptical about this because why would you do that? Well, let's take a look what happens when we apply the plugin to our scene. I'll add a node behind my color conversion node, and then I'll add the Dehancer effect. And immediately the image looks different. So what did just happen? When we look at the waveform, we can see that it somehow reduced the contrast, and the colors look a bit different too. But this is not an on or off effect, like a LUT. Let's look into the settings. There's actually a lot that we can configure here. Probably the most important setting is the film profile. When I scroll through the list, I remember some of the names like Agfa, Fujifilm, and Kodak from a long time ago, but I wouldn't know what to select here. So what I did is I went to the website shotonwhat.com. There you can look up movies and find out what they were shot on. Let's check The Matrix, for example. And down here it says it was shot on Kodak Vision 200T, 320T, and so on. So I will start with just that. It's great to experiment here while reading online about which movies were shot on those. I found this article here, for example, about The Matrix, with a lot of details about the production of that film, explained by cinematographer Bill Pope. You'll find the link in the description. Also, Dehancer itself provides a lot of documentation on the website with a lot of background information about analog film. So if you're interested in the science behind all of that, this is really great. If you have been wondering if Dehancer gives you something that you can't do in DaVinci Resolve directly, then I'd say there are two different approaches. The color tab in DaVinci Resolve gives you all the tools to manipulate every pixel as you want. Dehancer, on the other hand, allows you to play around with parameters of a physical process, only emulated, of course. As an example, after selecting the film profile, you can adjust the push-pull parameter. What this does, as you can read in this article on the Dehancer blog, is it under or overexposes the film and at the same time over or underdevelops it. Doing both in parallel keeps the brightness equal, but this changes the colors and contrast of the image. And it's a very important tool when working with analog film. And different film profiles show different characteristics here. I didn't know any of that before, but I think it's super interesting. Alternatively, you could also try to adjust tint, contrast, color wheels and so on in DaVinci Resolve directly to replicate that look. But this will probably not turn out to look like analog film as much as the emulation does. And again, the way of working with the tools is totally different. And Dehancer has a lot more to offer than just film profile. There is Film Developer that emulates the chemical process, which also influences colors and contrast. Film Compression moves highlights towards the midtones to imitate film, which usually has a higher dynamic range than digital sensors. With that, I can add back some details in the lamp here that my previous adjustments would have removed. I cannot talk about all these settings here, but let's definitely take a look at film grain. This is added by default and really gives a vintage look. I'm not a big fan of a lot of grain, so let's just add a little bit. Halation is an effect that happens on film at very bright areas and can look interesting around light sources. It creates this red glow. To make it really visible here, I have to use the custom profile where I can really tweak it. And bloom is kind of similar to the glow effect that a mist filter creates. But since this is a plugin, we can tweak the parameters here and get the right amount of the effect as we want. In general, the effect is a lot more local than the mist filter, which really changed the whole image. When we enable mask mode, we can see the effect in isolation. It's really only happening at very bright parts next to dark areas. Okay, so we tried different things. We went from the simple recording with a Canon zoom lens to a cinema lens. Then we tried to reduce the contrast to get a more cinematic look. We then tried a mist filter and got again a contrast reduction along with that glow effect. And then we used Dehancer to emulate film. So what worked best? Although I really like my Meike cinema lenses, I think it makes the least difference, unless you want to take advantage of the large aperture, the manual focusing, and so on. A mist filter creates a very interesting look, especially when you have light sources in the background. I would not say that you can use this all the time and it will always look right, but the softening of the skin and the glow worked out really well in this shot. However, the closest to a movie look I think we got with Dehancer. I'm really impressed by this plugin and I can't wait to do more with it. One advantage and at the same time disadvantage of a mist filter is that you can see the result immediately when you're shooting, but then it's also baked in, you cannot tweak the effect later. With Dehancer you can actually export your settings as a LUT that you can then put on your field monitor, but this will only include the color changes but not things like grain or glow, because a LUT is just a lookup table for color replacement and cannot do algorithmic things. Still, Dehancer really feels very real, almost like you're developing your films. There's a 2-week trial period. Even after that, you can play around with it, but it has a watermark then. And if you decide to get it, you can use my promo code Johannes to get 10% off. If you want to try a mist filter, check the links in the description. And don't forget to tell me in the comments which variant of the demo scene you liked best, and if you would rather go with a real mist filter or a software solution like Dehancer, or if you are in Team Cinema Lenses. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. See you next time.